Good morning, guys. Welcome back to my channel. This is Coach DC from All 22 Films. Got a delayed reaction here to the Detroit Lions' 17-13 win over the Washington Commanders on a day when their offense is only able to generate 110 yards through the air. But if you ask me, Kelvin Shepard's young defensive players really put on a show. Granted, there were some big plays allowed, particularly through the air, but the defense only allowed 9 first downs. The day obviously had a really wild beginning with Josh Dobbs getting decked by Amik Robertson, ironically, which forced a fumble. It was pressure from the left-hand side. Really not sure exactly what you're going to get out of Larry Borom over there at the left tackle position, although on that particular play that I'm referring to, it's not like he was matched up with Amik. But in any case, Joshua Joseph, the rookie from Tennessee, recovered, and Washington was up 7-0. Really quickly. They did play a number of starting caliber players early. I'm talking about the Commanders. Leo Chenal, Sonny Styles, Amik Robertson, among others. And then on the second possession, Dobbs throws an interception. I have no idea if someone was open before he threw that ball, but he had a ton of time. It was a 4-man rush. Felt like the offensive line obviously gave him an opportunity to find an open receiver if there was one. Nonetheless, he found a Commanders DB. This is kind of the Josh Dobbs experience, just to let you know. I mean, he did respond. That's what he does. He's a competitor. He had a 50-yard touchdown run on the third possession on like a 3rd and 5. Prior to that, he had converted another third down on a pass to Cedric Wilson over the middle. Ironically, Wilson got hurt on the next play, or on the very next play after that. But 2 snaps later, Dobbs keeps it on his own read, and everyone bites down from a Commander's perspective. The outside linebacker, edge defender, whoever it was, also the inside linebacker, the first-round pick, Sonny Styles, and the boundary side safety. I'll probably do a One Play Wednesday style video on that particular concept for sure. But Dobbs is out there for 3 possessions. And look, the fumble on the hit by Amik is not his fault. The pass pro breaks down to some extent. But you have a forced fumble, strip sack, whatever, for a touchdown, an interception where he's not forced to turn it over, and then a 50-yard touchdown run. This is the Josh Dobbs that I've seen before, whether he was in Arizona in 2023 or Minnesota, where he was traded that same year, I think in mid-October. If you recall, he actually led a come-from-behind win for the Vikings like 2 or 3 days after getting traded there. He turns the ball over a lot. He always has. Maybe it's a byproduct of some of the teams that he's been on, but this is kind of what you get. Very competitive guy. The links to Petzing from Arizona surely played a role. There's a reason why, to some extent, he's only played 1 year with pretty much every team he's been on. When I say that, I mean other than, with the exception of the Steelers, who drafted him in the 4th or 5th round, and I think he stayed there for 3 seasons. It should be noted, however, that the quarterbacks rotated, and I really like that, to be honest with you, if you think about it from one angle, and that's, when does a backup quarterback generally get in the game? Well, at the end of the game, if you're blowing somebody out, or if something happens to the starter and you're suddenly thrust into that situation. Now, granted, Dobbs and Altmyer knew that they were going to play the 1st and 3rd quarters in the case of Dobbs, the 2nd and the 4th in the case of Altmyer, but I like the fact that those guys are having to get back in the game at some point, even though they knew the schedule, they understood what it was going to be. I'm going to let some of the game stats flow through here. Obviously, like I said, the highlights were all on the defensive side. Kelvin Shepard and Dan Campbell committed to play, and more of their 1st/2nd level guys. Whether that was players that were obvious starters or just those that are, they're going to get on the field in the regular season to some extent. I thought that was a good thing. Selfishly, as a fan, to observe it and witness it, it was great because I know the All-22 film is going to be a lot of fun to look at. Aiden Hutchinson, Jack Campbell, no need to see those guys out there on the field, but in some of the fronts and looks out there, I think it was productive to get the talent lined up together in an actual game situation. Washington offensively only played their starters, Jaden Daniels, Stephon Diggs, among others. They only played them 1 snap, but from a Detroit perspective, or one series, excuse me, from a Detroit perspective, DJ Reed was extremely active, had 2 TFLs, one of which was a violent open field tackle on a toss play. Levi Onwuzurike looked good out there. I'm not sure if he's lighter than the last time we saw him on the field consistently. It felt to me like he looked a little bit more agile when he was involved. Still kind of pops up and plays a little bit upright, in my opinion. But definitely he was able to close down the line of scrimmage twice and make plays. Whether he was credited with a tackle in each instance, I'm not sure. The most impressive play for me from a Levi perspective was he was getting cut by the backside tackle, and he was able to perfectly sprawl, get his hands out and his hips back, and then close down the line of scrimmage, close down on the football, and make the tackle. He looked very explosive, quick, and active, if you ask me. Devin White was his usual disruptive self. Well, I say usual. We're only through 2 games here with the Lions, but I thought he played extremely well. My notes had him involved to some extent, either making the tackle against the run, in coverage, or used as a blitzer on 5 of the opening 8 plays. To me, it's a good signing. We did see some examples of Devin White, Rodriguez, and Barnes all on the field at the same time, with Barnes kicked out to be an edge defender / outside linebacker. I should note, in addition, that most of my reactions here, as far as those types of players, DJ Reed, Devin White, Derek Moore, etc., they're obviously going to be from the first half only, because those guys, for the most part, were not on the field in the third quarter, other than Moore. From a defense perspective, only giving up 9 first downs is obviously a success. In addition, getting 6 quarterback hits. I did feel like the DBs were a little bit more vulnerable today. Abney was hit deep one time, Whiteside as well, up the right sideline. Washington's quarterbacks, they did throw for 243 yards on 20 of 26 passing, but their run game was totally knocked out. I'm talking about the Commanders. Washington only able to produce 35 yards, on 17 carries. The biggest story, the one that I'll focus on first once I get the All-22 film, will be, of course, rookie Derek Moore. Looked very athletic and disruptive. He recorded his first sack on an upfield rush, but also versatile in his reactions, and I would say technical. I've already looked at some of the game film, the broadcast film, a second time to decide what I wanted to say about him, so I'm just, really just waiting on the All-22 film to come out so I can package something together for you guys. But in any case, the sack for Moore was a situation where the quarterback perceived some pressure up the middle. I believe it was Skylar Gill-Howard on a TE stunt, kind of working through the B-gap. And Moore, all of his rushes today were topside rushes, were upfield rushes to the outside shoulder of the tackle, unless he was on a stunt to the inside. I do remember one of those where he basically decks the left guard and knocks him on the ground. But the sack was on Washington's 4th possession. They had gone punt in the game's opening minutes. The sack was on Washington's 3rd possession, They punted 4 times in the first half. I felt like defensively there were a ton of guys just flying around. And at one point during the second quarter, I questioned to myself, is this Detroit defense one that's going to play better in attack mode, coming downhill? And that kind of lines up with what Kelvin Shepherd had done last year. An attack-style defense to trying to get after the quarterback, play a lot of man coverage. You did see some of those looks yesterday, if you ask me. I thought Moore fit in with the stunts extremely well. There seemed to be a correlation between when Moore was on the field and him rushing upfield and that TE stunt that I mentioned earlier from the opposite side. And so basically I would say that's coordinated. It appeared to me that Moore was tasked or given instructions, let's work on your upfield rushes today. And he was not winning consistently there, don't get me wrong, but it's the preseason. And so it's possible they said, hey, Derek, we want you to work on your best upfield rush on each pass rush opportunity that we give you, because we expect you to be on the field in the regular season. And generally, he was a speed to power type guy in college. So I'm not going to draw a conclusion from 3 or maybe 4 pass rush losses, quote unquote, so to speak. I'm not going to do that here. He's a fantastic young player. Good to see him out there in week 2 of the preseason. He had an impact. I think he dropped in coverage one time and looked very comfortable there. Just a versatile, multiple football player who was very disruptive in addition on a run play to open the third quarter. He did jump off sides, however, but there's some real versatility, if you ask me, that Moore demonstrated in the limited snaps that we got. Some other guys to talk about from a Lions standpoint here in a moment, but has to be mentioned, the backup quarterback or perhaps third-string guy for Washington, I think it's Athan Kaliakmanis, um, Illinois State Player of the Year in high school, went to Minnesota and then Rutgers. He was sharp. He looked very calm and composed. I thought his arm strength and his accuracy make him a very interesting player. I would say this is just on a small sample size, 11 of 14 passing. It did seem like he targeted Keith Abney 3 or maybe 4 times during the time frame that he was in the game. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the third string quarterback for the Ravens right now, Joe Fagnano, meaning if you leave him out there unprotected, I could see some team trying to claim some of these guys that appear to be able to throw the ball well and look very calm and composed. Nonetheless, Detroit's defense, a number of the young guys were impressive. Gill-Howard again. I don't believe he finished with a ton of production in terms of tackles and stuff like that, but very disruptive, violent. He split a sack earlier in the game with Wanham, but unfortunately there was a penalty on Abney down the field, I think for a hold. Gill-Howard, in addition, had moved the pocket back on that sack, where it was a split sack between him and Wanham, I believe. He had a tackle for loss as the backside defensive tackle in the fourth quarter as well. Just a very quick off-the-ball player that you can use in attack mode, as soon as this year perhaps. Nick Whiteside covered 2 short routes very well, so did Rock Ya-Sin. Well, that one about Rock was on a third down, but getting back to Whiteside, the long speed perhaps showing up a little bit more as an issue. He gave up a 55-yard catch to Nick Nash. Now, if you don't know who Nick Nash is, a very accomplished wide receiver from San Jose State. When I say that, what I'm referring to is Nash had 104 tackles and like 15 or 16 touchdowns last year at San Jose State. The season prior, 2024, is when Nash converted from quarterback to wide receiver, and he had 8 touchdown catches that year. So it's not like Whiteside gave up a big catch to someone who doesn't have a chance to make an NFL roster. But it should be mentioned, Nash is not a burner, and he was able to get by Whiteside deep down the right sideline. So again, it was from a press alignment, from a Whiteside perspective. I did a film study video on him after last week's preseason game, and pretty much solidified, as far as my opinion goes now, that press man coverage would be the style or the technique that offers the most opportunity for offenses to attack him. He's very long, very smart, and heady, if you ask me, aware of his surroundings. But on those situations where he's playing press man and he's got to turn and run, it looks like he's vulnerable to quick wide receivers. All right, we had another chance to look at Eric O'Neill, the UDFA defensive end from Rutgers, and prior to that with James Madison. Now, this was later in the game, but he was extremely disruptive on a fourth quarter possession for Washington. Hartman, the second stringer, I believe, was back in, or perhaps he's their third stringer. But in any case, the Lions are up 14-13, and there's a 2nd and 2. O'Neill's lined up at left side defensive end, and he stunts to the inside. He's got a path to the running back clearly, and he is held. I mean, even the Lions announcers that I had, they recognized, they were like, that's a hold. There was no call, which was surprising on a day when I think these two teams combined for 18 penalties, if I did my math right. But on that same possession, O'Neill had a tackle for loss on the ensuing snap, 3rd and 3. And then on the 4th down, when Washington went for it, he had a quarterback hit, or maybe it was just a pressure. It was a clean win against the right tackle. Hartman was actually attempted to throw the ball to the running back on a wheel. It was Craig Reynolds versus Eric Hunter. There just wasn't enough time for an accurate throw from Hartman because O'Neill was in his face. Sticking with the defensive secondary, Abney played a lot. He seemed to be targeted multiple times in that second quarter, third quarter turnaround. He was definitely competing, and I thought on some of those reps he was in good phase or in good coverage relationship, but he had a DPI on the big completion to Jaden Bradley, the one-handed catch that was pretty unbelievable. Bradley is a guy who moved around a lot in college, like so many these days, but finished up at UNLV. Abney, despite giving up a lot of yards there, I think he did force 2 incompletions, not from a PD standpoint, but just being in tight coverage. I think it's a good thing that he's out there, that he's getting so many reps, but you see, I think, some of the limitations or some of the opportunities for teams to throw at him with 6'1 or 6'2 or 6'3 wide receivers. The defense only got 45 snaps overall for the game, and it should be mentioned that the second/third line receivers for Washington, it's a pretty good group for real. Their starters weren't out there. I mean, Stephon Diggs, I think, played one possession or maybe a couple of snaps, but you got the rookie Antonio Williams, Jaden Bradley, Nick Nash, who's very accomplished, like I said, plus 100 catches last year at San Jose State. Van Jefferson was actually on the field in the second quarter as well. Jackson Meeks, from a Lions perspective, a really unique football game. A converted tight end, obviously you guys know that from wide receiver. He had 4 catches on 5 or 6 targets. It does not seem like he'll be used as a tight end when they're looking for the tight ends to actually engage anyone, like a base block. More so on split zone or hide, or some people refer to it as sift techniques, basically where the tight end lines up on one side, let's say the right-hand side of the offense here, and then works across the heels or the back of the offensive line to the opposite side, to the left-hand side of the offense. He did also have 3 tackles, I guess all on special teams. The forced fumble on kickoff in the fourth quarter was pretty amazing, if you ask me. That was, I think, after Bates had just made it 17-13, and it was just outside the 2-minute warning. So that, combined with a 4th down conversion on a run concept, allowed Detroit to close out the game. But for Jackson Meeks, man, to switch positions to tight end and have special teams impact as a guy who's trying to obviously stick around, I think that's a pretty significant production, pretty significant day to have 4 catches and 3 tackles on the same afternoon. I will say this about Washington's offense. Early on, it looked very similar to what we saw under Cliff Kingsbury. Now, admittedly, there was also some under center stuff going on that Kingsbury did not use. But that first possession with Jaden Daniels, to me, it looked like the same formations, the same concepts. Early on, Devin White was very disruptive, playing downhill. That I'm talking about on the opening drive. He had a pressure on Daniels where I thought he was held, literally right in front of the refs on the first play of the game. Wanham on the second snap got an actual sack, along with a nickel blitz there. Washington pulled Daniels off the field pretty much after that. All right, now I'm going to talk about the offensive line a little bit. There's clearly a lot of good conversation and things to observe about the defense. The plan for the Lions' offensive line was a little difficult to watch. As I said a little earlier, I'm not sure what you have in Borum. Who knows? Maybe he's not 100% or something. I'm not aware of any injuries that he's recovering from. Just to me, in the first 2 weeks that we've observed, I do not see someone that you would trust in the event that he has to be on the field for an extended period of time at tackle. Now, were there better options in the draft at the locations where Detroit was selecting? Probably not, right? But Borum just does not strike me as someone who's athletic enough or strong enough to handle everything you'll be confronted by as an NFL tackle. There, to me, looks like a huge gap between Borum and Blake Miller, let alone Borum and Penei Sewell. Now, moving on, Seth McLaughlin had 2 or 3 rough snaps early, in my opinion. I know the plan from a front office perspective was Cade Mays, and he was injured, and now he's out for an extended period of time. Again, I don't think that Seth presents as someone you would want out there and exposed to facing starters, the athletic, explosive, powerful defensive tackles in one-on-one situations in particular. I have to think that Juice Scruggs is probably the option here. McLaughlin just does not strike and or latch on in a way to physically dominate some of those guys, especially in one-on-one situations, but I think he's very good in combo blocks, more of a tactician who's got to rely on sound movement. I felt like he got beat twice, just a slow twitch player, if you ask me, at the center position, especially in one-on-one situations. I'm not sure what others observed or have said to you as yet. Feel free to let me know in the comment section. Blake Miller did have the one play where he lost his footing, but then he kept on blocking, which was tremendous, right? He actually was able to give the running back a lane to cut off of, which was, kind of unbelievable. I thought there was one stunt where Miller stepped down inside, like stepped down along with the right guard because the outside linebacker, was stunting to that side, and then there was an edge blitz that may have been Blake Miller's responsibility, but I can't tell. It was like a nickel DB, mid to late first quarter. Blake Miller's day was done early, and when Sorsdahl came in, whoa, the difference was just massive. Luke Altmaier was under siege. I believe he got sacked 3 times on the first possession that he was in, which would have been Detroit's 4th after taking over for Dobbs. Detroit had actually reached Washington's 37 before 2 sacks ended the possession. Now, granted, that was a 13-play drive, so perhaps 3 sacks over a 13-play time frame doesn't look too bad, but really poor offensive line play on that possession, from a pass pro standpoint. The fall off looks really steep, but the reality is, and it should be said, that's the case around much of the NFL. Offensive line play during this preseason appears to be at an extremely low level. Now, as the season progresses, players and teams, offensive line groups get more familiar with each other, then of course things will probably settle down just like they did last year. But right now, when you watch so many of these teams play, it looks like teams have 4 legitimate starters, maybe 5. And I get it, the preseason is bound to look like this with so many players shuttling in and out. The Lions did finish with 169 rushing yards on 35 attempts, but I'm reflecting a lot on the first half from a gameplay standpoint, and even that, I think those rushing numbers, the total output is skewed somewhat by the 50-yard run from Dobbs. Essentially, let me do it this way. Running backs for Detroit on the day had 30 carries for 113 yards. I talked about the passing numbers a little bit in the lead-in. Of course, they ended up being quite pedestrian from a statistical standpoint, right? 110 yards passing, got sacked 5 times. The offense did run 65 plays. Quarterbacks were 16 of 25. Dobbs' big run, of course, is the highlight. There seemed to be just a ton of pressure on Altmaier. He did, however, convert, I think, a really important 4th and 3 to Jackson Meeks with about 5:40, 5:35 left in the game. This would have been, at the time, Detroit was up 14-13, and eventually Bates' field goal makes it 17-13. So that was an important play. I think it was out into the right flats. Altmaier may not have necessarily been flushed out by pressure, but he ended up moving out to his right side towards the sideline and found Jackson Meeks. But in any case, an interesting game, one that I think from a film study standpoint, I will focus more time on the Lions' young defensive players. The All-22 film actually did just pop up while I was recording this video a few moments ago. So the first one I intend to put out is, of course, going to be on the rookie edge defender, Derek Moore. You guys let me know what you were impressed with from a Lions standpoint in the comments section. If you were I don't know if I want to use disappointed, but struck by the huge fall off from an offensive line standpoint in talent and ability to execute that we saw from the 3rd to the 4th possession. Really, it's the 4th possession, once Altmaier comes in and gets sacked 3 times. And finally, if you think other Lions fans would enjoy my thoughts here on the game, as well as some of the plays that I think were of most importance in the Lions' 17-13 win, then please consider grabbing a link to this video, sharing it out on social media to help this content get more reach. Appreciate you guys' time.